Welcome to yet another episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. My name is Edwin Sarmiento, and welcome if you're joining in for the very first time. The purpose of the Practical SQL Server HADR show is to share lessons that I've learned working with high availability and disaster recovery solutions for the past 20 plus years now. With specific focus on a Microsoft SQL Server data platform. But beyond just sharing the lessons that I've learned, because most of the time we kind of think, oh, lessons, I want to learn what to do. I also share mistakes that I made. Yes, as important as the things to do are the things not to do. Best practices and sometimes not so best practices, experiences from customers that I've worked with, projects, and bringing them all together to provide practical SQL Server HADR lessons. And I kind of emphasize the word practical because sometimes when I get brought in to do either an assessment, a design, or sometimes even to troubleshoot an issue, I see implementations of SQL Server high availability and or disaster recovery solutions that are not practical, meaning either it's over-designed, sometimes it's under-provisioned, and does not meet the business needs. The fact that high availability and disaster recovery in and of itself, very expensive and very complicated, I want it to be pragmatic and practical. Right? I wanted to start off a new series. We're still technically in I want to say the first couple of weeks in the year, and I wanted to share, or I wanted to start off a new series that I call Inherited Disasters series. This is a series that focuses on you, maybe you're a database administrator and this is, you're starting up a new job. You just got hired and you're excited to join this new company, and lo and behold, first couple of days, you already see that there is something weird, something fishy about the environment, and now it is your responsibility to take over. Or maybe you're a consultant and you're coming in, or a contractor even, you're coming into an environment, and now it is your responsibility to take care of this. They're passing the baton to you, and now it is your responsibility to take care of it. So that's going to be the series. I'd like to think of it as a 4-week series, starting with this one, to really understand what you can do as you're stepping into a new environment, inheriting a new environment, and realizing that it is such a mess that you don't have any other choice but to fix it. But now the responsibility is now onto you. You might be thinking, wait a second, I got brought in. This is going to be my new job now. Yes, and it is kind of tempting. It is tempting for us to put on our best foot forward in the first week and try to fix everything. No, I want to say it's a wrong strategy to approach it, because for one, just like how you would treat any high availability and or disaster recovery solution, the goal is risk mitigation. Okay, risk mitigation. So you coming in as a database administrator, you coming in first week on a job, brand new customer or brand new client you have to work with, and again, immediately you want to showcase, you want to show off, this is how good I am. But again, the very reason why high availability and disaster recovery solutions are there is because you want to mitigate risk. That goes the same with your job and your career. Okay, ever heard of the term DBA, or the acronym DBA, which does not really stand for database administrator, although that's what we all are familiar with. But within the data platform community, we have this joke around the term DBA, which is the default blame acceptor. Now everybody is blaming you for things that you're not even aware of, or not even responsible for, or you don't even know existed until you join the company. Okay, and that's why you have to treat this like some form of a risk mitigation strategy, because even if you didn't build it, even if you didn't configure anything, even if you're not, again, you're not aware of it, it's now your responsibility. And this is, man, I got like more than a dozen stories of this coming from my customers, my clients, and also my own personal stories about working with brand new customers when I was working at a managed services provider, working with a new client environment, and now we're responsible to stabilize the entire thing. Again, it is tempting to immediately jump in and fix the problem, right? The idea behind this, again, is for the first part of this entire series is you're inheriting an environment you don't trust. The system doesn't even trust itself. Okay, so it's when you're again you're coming in, you're doing an evaluation or an assessment, or even before you touch anything. First instinct, you open up SQL Server Management Studio, connect to a SQL Server instance, and start looking at the setup. Then and it is tempting as well, especially if you come from large organizations and you have a way to automate stuff like this where you start running scripts. That in and of itself is dangerous because, for one, again, you don't know exactly what the estate looks like. I mean, the infrastructure looks like. You don't know what's there. You don't know what you don't know how many SQL Server instances, how many databases, and you don't know what high availability and disaster recovery solutions are there. So when you start running scripts, you wouldn't know exactly what can happen. And I've seen this happen so many times. Initially, when I was brought in as a consultant and had to work with Microsoft support with a premier field engineer, where we had to evaluate an environment for a Fortune 500 company. And a typical Microsoft process is they will not be the one running the scripts. They will give you some scripts to run to do an evaluation of an entire environment. Lo and behold, 2 minutes, 3 minutes after running the script, all of a sudden the system started to slow down. It is affecting performance, and all of a sudden we had to stop that script from running. And again, this is tempting because you see something, you immediately want to fix the problem because you think and you assume that it is a problem. I mean, familiarity and seeing the trend is what got you to observe and see that there is indeed some issues with the system, right? And even worse is when, let's say, you log into a SQL Server instance, there are certain configurations that you don't understand why. Like, you don't understand. And one case that I worked on, I noticed that there were like 5 tempdb data files. 5, not even number, 5. And I have no idea. I know for a fact that it's not a recommended best practice, and I don't know yet why they did that. It's tempting to just delete that extra tempdb file just because it doesn't follow kind of like the recommended general best practice. But until you understand what's going on, it is a risk to both the environment and to your career, to your job, because, hey, this brand new guy starts poking around and all of a sudden we're having some performance issues or outage issues or availability issues. You'll never know. Even worse is you ask for documentation. The documentation was written 5 years ago, never updated. And so you're trying to make sense of what you're reading versus what you're seeing. Or even worse is there is no documentation, and now you have to poke and click, right-click properties just so you can see what and how the system was configured. Okay. Again, you're now responsible for it, but you don't trust it. What do you do? Okay. And before we get to the doing part, okay, we're going to be I'm going to share a framework that I use before we jump into the framework of how to do the doing. You have to come to or you have to approach it differently. Like I said in the beginning, it's tempting because, again, first week, first day on a job, first few days, to want to showcase, put your best foot forward and start fixing and modifying things, okay? Because, I don't know, maybe it's just human nature. We want people to like us. We want our new boss, our new company to recognize us. And so we like give our best on our first week. But that's a recipe for disaster. Again, if you don't understand some settings, if you don't understand the business requirements, if you don't understand the business decisions behind why something was configured that way, making modifications now becomes a risk, not just to the environment, but to you, okay? And hopefully not being called the DBA, the default blame acceptor, for everything that could potentially go wrong, right? And I don't want to say playing the political game, because again, for one, there's a reason why they hired you. There's a reason why the company brought you in. Is number one, they need extra pair of hands, they need an extra headcount, but also they have a goal within their IT environment, either to stabilize it, either to make sure that they're ready for growth, fix a ton of problems. That's the thing. And so if the goal is to fix problems, the last thing you want is to add another problem by making modifications to it. Okay? So, like I say, I don't want to play the political game, but that's just the reality. And as human beings, we cannot detach ourselves from other people when we're working with them, especially if it is it's a fine line to walk, especially if it's your first week on the job, right? And so, avoid, I know it's a strong word, avoid the temptation to to tweak any setting, avoid the temptation to clean things up, right? Unless, of course, it's an emergency and you know for a fact that you need to do something about it. But first week on the job, avoid the temptation to make modifications, avoid the temptation to make changes and tweak, config, avoid the temptation to standardize. And I know you might be thinking, what the hell is this guy talking about? Because that's the instinct, especially if you've seen, especially senior engineers who have gone through, when I was starting out, it's chaos. And we've created standards, we've created processes, we've created procedures to improve our entire data infrastructure to a point where even our high availability and disaster recovery, everything's standardized. And now you're coming into this new job, this new environment, you're responsible for it, and it's a total mess. Again, I kind of like to think of it as we humans are hardwired to solve problems. So the minute that we see something that isn't good and we understand that there's a problem, there's this tendency to fix it immediately, jump into it. Because for one, again, you don't know the history behind it yet. And so part of that is understanding the history, why something is done this way. I remember working with one of my first always on available group deployments. I was not responsible for the SQL Server side of things. I was brought in to do the SharePoint, which is kind of weird. They brought me in for the SharePoint side of things, but they've already built the Windows Server failover cluster, and it was not built the way it was supposed to be. Well, I don't want to say it's not built with available groups in mind. What I mean by that is the customer already built the failover cluster with shared storage. And I asked them, why do you build it this way? And they said, well, our former engineer built it this way because that's how he's built Windows Server failover clusters back in the days. Not realizing that always on available groups do not require shared storage. Now, I did not tell them you're wrong, and I just asked questions. And part of that is really understanding the rationale behind why they did what they did, because they're not aware sometimes, or the information that they have about an infrastructure they're trying to build is no longer relevant to the solution that they're trying to build. Just like that example of Windows Server failover cluster having shared storage because that's how they did it back then. Not realizing always on available groups, especially if you only have like standalone instances, and they have no reason to spin up failover clustered instances because there's no app yet. They're just building SharePoint at that point. And because it's easy to say that's wrong, we fix it. If I did not ask that question, I will be in constant battle and in constant argument and in constant finger pointing. I'm right, you're wrong, and they'll be like, I'm right, you're wrong. But asking questions to understand why they did what they did gives me a better perspective on how to address it moving forward. And also thinking about, hey, if they're not going to be using that shared storage architecture or infrastructure, so how can we maximize that? Okay. We don't know yet if there are business decisions or business processes that depend on that system that you saw is not properly configured, it's a mess. So making modifications to it could potentially cause issues on that critical business process. Maybe, for instance, you see that there's a massively large file on the C drive, and you know for a fact that it does not belong there. So you want to take it out of the C drive, not realizing there's an ETL process that's critical every day that runs, and it's hitting that file on the C drive. It's reading that file, not realizing that file is critical to the daily ETL process that runs. And so all of these things, because we're not aware yet, you're not aware yet of what and how and why things are configured that way, it's set up that way, it's a complete mess. It could potentially cause outage, which of course at the end of the day you end up getting blamed for it because you made modifications, any kind of modifications. Okay, so I want to introduce, and again I'm just laying the groundwork because again this is going to be an entire series. But understand, while it is tempting to jump in and fix something, to jump in and tweak settings, to jump in and start making modifications to the environment, especially if you know 100%. If you know 100% that there's an issue and there's some mess, but unless it's an emergency situation, avoid the temptation of making any changes. I remember another case that I worked on, typical Microsoft best practice, don't put your database files on C drive. Don't. Looked at an environment, saw that they're standardized across the board, across about hundreds and hundreds of SQL Server instances. Their database files are on C:\MS SQL. It's on the C drive, and good thing I had the awareness and the wisdom to keep my mouth shut and ask questions. I'm curious, why do you have your database files on the C drive? Turns out that they had this massively large all-flash array, very expensive all-flash array tier storage, and what they did was they standardized on putting all of their databases on that all-flash enterprise storage subsystem and configured mount point. So technically the databases are not sitting on the C drive. They're sitting on the mount points. It just looked like they were on the C drive. And part of this is just standardizing. They have a standard way of doing this. And again, seeing all of these practices standardizing on how configurations are done, it was easy for me to jump into conclusions, say that's wrong. But not understanding, I could have looked like a complete idiot, like accusing them of something without understanding what they're doing. In fact, that was a really great practice for them because it allowed them to do a complete snapshot of their storage. They have a technology that would allow them to do a snapshot of the entire storage that contains all of their databases, critical databases, and performance-wise it's great. Take a snapshot of that and replicate it across data centers, and that became their DR strategy. So even before you make those modifications, again, ask questions, be curious. And I wanted to introduce you to what I call the ART framework. This will be the structure of this entire series. And ART stands for three things. And I know I've kind of preempted and given you the idea behind what to do in first week, and that's not to make modifications, that's not to touch. Part of that, letter A, is for assessing or assessment. Okay, understand the risk without touching production. This means asking questions, reading documentation, and again, avoid the temptation of running scripts. And I know it's easy to run scripts because you can automate the entire thing. I can run the script across multiple servers all at the same time, one click. But don't do it in the middle of a production environment. Don't do it in the middle of normal business hours. Maybe do it after office hours and request for change, which is R. Okay. Well, R means multiple things. One is request for change, and two, you want to reduce your risk. Request for change to reduce the risk. I should put an R cube there. Request for change and reduce the risk. You don't just run a script to do an assessment. You request for change so that somebody, your boss, your manager, would know and is aware and has signed off on something when you start running your scripts for assessment. Like, for instance, you decide in the assessment phase you want to run a Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit. I know it's an old tool, but still useful for on-premises deployments. Run it, but before you do, you tell your boss and then you tell your security team, hey, I'm going to be running this. So if somehow our SIAM tools start flagging this tool, know for a fact that I'm running it within this time and this time, just to get an idea of the kind of environment that I'm going to be responsible for. Okay? So A is for assessment, understand the risk, ask questions, interact with the business stakeholders, maybe probe for history. Probe for history. I worked on a case a couple of years ago where they had a stretched failover cluster, a 2-node stretched failover cluster across 2 different data centers for their availability group. And I asked the DBA. It turned out he just started a few weeks ago, and the person who built it already left. No documentation, no handoff, and when the old person left, nobody's there to take care of it. So they hired this DBA to take care of it, not knowing the history, not knowing the reason why he built it that way. And so the reason they brought me in was because they kept getting outages after outages, and he does not know what to do. So understanding this, understanding the risk, getting a lot of history, asking questions, and this first week is the time when you ask more questions. Teammates, people outside of your team, business stakeholders, CIO, CTO, executive team ask questions. Even if they brought in a third-party vendor, a consultant, managed service provider, reach out and ask questions. And the purpose of which is this research. Asking questions. And sometimes, again, when you're looking at documentation, and it's easy for us technical professionals to really rely on documentation because we don't like talking to people. We avoid talking to people. But sometimes documentation either does not exist, or if it does, it's completely outdated. So ask a ton of questions. Okay? Again, I'm going to dive deeper into the assessment piece when we get to the next episode. R is for requests for change, requests for change to reduce risk. Okay, you are requesting for change. You don't just make modifications. You request for, and it's also documented. That way, if they start asking, here it is. If something goes wrong, here somebody approved it. And when it does provide improvements, made the entire infrastructure stable, reliable, highly available, and everybody's happy, now you have proof that it is actually you who did the work. And T is to transform. Okay, transform is only after you've requested for change, even to do an assessment, to reduce the risk, is when you start transforming, but not drastically transform, but to pinpoint what I call low-hanging fruit. First off, what are the things that are people complaining about most of the time? What's the most pressing problem? And you target those. If it needs to be modified, like for instance that SQL Server instance where I found there was 5 temp DB data files. I have no idea why. I still did not know why, but I know for a fact that based on the monitoring information, based on the performance, they don't even need 4, maybe 2 temp DB data files is all they need. But again, part of the transformation and the tweaking of the environment comes in the T of the ART framework. Okay, and again, this is just to give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about throughout the month for the series. The ART framework, when you inherit an environment that complete mess, and you know for a fact that it needs to be modernized or upgraded or changed or tweaked or to be stabilized, it's tempting for us to jump into that immediately, into taking action, make modifications, make ourselves look really, really good for brownie points so that you can earn favor from your boss. Do not fall into that temptation, okay? Do not fall into that temptation because, again, you want to reduce the risk both on the environment and your career as well, okay? And so, again, that's just giving you a little bit of a context on what we're going to be covering for this the entire month on this series on inherited disasters series. I mentioned that story about somebody coming in, they brand new DBA, didn't know what to do. Somebody else built the environment, and so he has no clue, still, even without documentation. But part of that is really the risk that you're taking. Even though it's your job, even though it's part of what you will be doing for the rest of the time that you'll be in this company, it's also unwise to immediately start. And the reality is this: people hate change. Whether we accept it or not, whether we believe it or not, people hate change. And the moment you start changing something, people freak out. Sometimes I know it's a political thing. You start making modifications to something that somebody else built, and now they're thinking, hey, you're messing with my baby. Don't touch my baby. I've seen and I've encountered people like that in the field where they built this app that's connected to the database. Now the database is mission critical, and he does not want anybody touching this because it's his baby. And so you have to learn how to deal with those kinds of situations as part of your job, even though now it's going to be your responsibility, even though now you're taking ownership of it. Some people are very protective of their baby. So if let's say for instance, the old person who's about to retire built this entire infrastructure, maybe the reason why he does not want to tell you how he built it, how he configured it, is because he wants to feel good about himself and he wants to feel needed. And so why would he tell you? Then all of a sudden they don't need me anymore. Okay, part of that, and some people call it political. I just look at it as, it's just human nature. When people try to protect what's theirs, it's a survival instinct. And so part of the ART framework, assess, request for change so that you can reduce the risk and then transform. Part of that is getting other people involved. High availability in disaster recovery is not an individual sport. It's a team sport. Even though you're the only person on the team doing this, even though you're the very reason why that's the very reason they brought you in, is because you will take ownership of it. Bringing other people on on other teams, if you have siloed teams, bringing other people even business stakeholders, and understanding the reasons why something was configured that way, even though it's messy, becomes your guardrails for protecting both the environment before you even stabilize it, because you definitely don't want to make modifications to it that could potentially cause an outage. Bad setting, tweaked, all of a sudden took down the entire infrastructure. You don't want to be that person on your first week. Okay, understanding it and learning the ART framework is what we're going to be talking about for the entire series on this, and it will help lay the groundwork for how you manage the entire infrastructure moving forward. Okay, that is about it for this episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. And again, tune in, because this is going to be the topic for the entire 4-week series: inheriting messy, disastrous environments, and you're now responsible for it. We'll keep the DBA acronym as a database administrator, not the default blame acceptor. You don't want to be blamed for something that somebody else did, because that's going to be the natural response. Oh, it's the new guy. It's his fault, right? Join in for the next couple of weeks on getting into how to deal with inherited disasters. And I've already given you a high-level overview. We're going to dive deeper into every single letter of the ART framework. Okay? And if you do need help with anything regarding SQL Server high availability and or disaster recovery solutions, reach out. Use that link on the screen. Schedule a strategy session. And this will direct you to my calendar page where you can pick and choose a time that works for you. In that session or call, I call it strategy session for two reasons. One, we'll explore, I'm already using the ART framework here. We'll do an assessment. What are you struggling with? What are the problems are? What are pain points? What are the things that are preventing you from achieving your goals? Like for instance, we're having outage after outage and we are not sure what's the cause. We're going to get clear on that and what the real goal is. And part two of that, the second part of it, is to help you get a strategy on how to address all the issues as well as solve the problems so that you can achieve your goals. Whether that's building a new high availability solution, fix your existing high availability solution, or empowering your team. Maybe somebody built it and then left, and now your team does not know how to manage, how to troubleshoot issues when something goes wrong. That's part of it. Again, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session. Happy to help in any way I can. All right? That is about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll see you again in the next episode. And again, tune in as we go through this entire series on inherited disasters. Goodbye.